We're joined now out of Melbourne, as I sort of can the approach of the show. We're joined now out of Melbourne by Labor MP Michael Danby. Mr Danby, thanks for joining us.
Hi Peter, how are you? And hi team.
I'm very well. Look, what are your reasons for switching to Kevin Rudd?
In your dreams. I'm standing there with Bill Shorten and Stephen Conroy with Julia Gillard's most reliable legion.
So what you're telling us is that
wall.
as soon as Bill Shorten and Stephen Conroy shift, you switch too? Or are you sticking anyway?
No. We're, your column that suggested that we're all sort of robots was slightly wrong, but we all work together. We're all people who respect each other intellectually, and we're trying to face Mr Abbott and the people from the north who are trying to come across Hadrian's Wall.
I think there's a few invaders before you get to Mr Abbott, but we'll move on from that. But I do want to ask you this. I mean, this is a legitimate question. We've seen this Galaxy poll that you've probably just heard in the news talking about how basically if Kevin Rudd comes back, the vote surges in Queensland. There's a bit of self-interest here, isn't there, in the sense that someone like yourself in Victoria, Victorian MPs would probably feel like you're better off with Julia Gillard as a Victorian, whereas all the people that might benefit in the Labor Party from a Kevin Rudd comeback in Queensland, they're not in caucus, they don't get a vote. In a sense, this is difficult for Rudd, isn't it?
Look, I don't think we should... First of all, Kevin says he isn't a candidate, and I respect him. We've been talking a lot on issues that he's very good on, such as his a very informed international analysis on China. But don't say we should just view it from the point of view of the latest poll. I mean, some other poll will say we should do this, some other poll will say we do that. The point is the turmoil that changes would bring. People who are critics of ours would simply turn on Kevin you know, the Prime Minister and our policies are the policies that can get us through to the next election. We're unpopular now for a few weeks. We were popular in January and December. People in politics just have to learn to keep their nerve. And we're pretty experienced, all of us, and I think the majority of us, as far as I can see, haven't changed their views, including people from Queensland and New South Wales. There were divisions there before. There are the same divisions that are there now, but I don't see that there's been any major change.
Well, you certainly sound excited about Julia Gillard's leadership, but I think Tim Wilson's got a question for you.
Well, that's precisely following on from that, Michael. What would it take for you to switch to Kevin Rudd? I mean, in terms of primary votes now, we're talking
He's
basically...
not going to answer that. That's a ridiculous question. What would, I mean, how can he answer that
What is the primary vote that would require a serious leadership challenge? If it went into low 20s, would you seriously consider at that point?
Low 20s? Well, of course he would.
You know, I mean...
Well,
but that's ridiculous.
I mean, how can I deal with such unbelievable hypotheticals, Tim? You wouldn't expect me to sort of give an answer to a question like that.
So you've got an answer, just not to give it up.
Prime Minister, the Prime Minister is our leader. She has our support. The policies on Australia's economic development compared to everywhere else in the world, and our social policies like the National Disability Insurance Scheme will ultimately grind away at Mr Abbott, who will have to, before this election, come up with the costings for all of his policies, and you'll be surprised we'll do much better than you think.
Well, Michael, you paint a very different picture of the Labor Party to the one we had painted by Paul Hales in the last 24 hours. He portrays the party as a party eating itself alive at the moment and struggling for any oxygen at all to tell any positive story about policy. How much do you agree with that? How much does it feel like that to you from the inside?
Look, it's been a very difficult beginning of the week. You know, you'd be dishonest if you didn't admit it, but I'm very pleased from where I stand. Tanya Plibersek and the Prime Minister have solved perception, a wrong perception, that health funding from the federal government had been lessened to Victorian hospitals, so there's one less problem behind us. And, you know, I think journalists can't talk for 3 weeks until Parliament resumes about these opinion polls, so eventually we'll get back to discussing issues. Keep calm, forge ahead, and we'll be back to the situation we were in December and January.
Ainsley, you got a question?
Yes, Michael, I understand that on election day come September you may not be out on the hustings due to your religious beliefs. I would like to hear your views on some of Paul House's language that he used at the AWU conference yesterday, including, I think, grow a pair and gutless so-and-so. I won't say it for the benefit of television.
I'll say it. He said pricks. He called his Labor colleagues in caucus pricks.
Look, because I've got religious values doesn't mean I'm unrealistic about union leaders. Come on, I mean, this is Australia. Because I'm being consistent on.
Were you offended?
No, I don't. I mean, I disagree with some of them pretty strongly, but I do it to their faces. I wouldn't call them that on TV. But I mean, I think Kevin Rudd made a mistake when he expelled Dean Mile and other people for some fruity language that they use at an ALP conference. I mean, we're all adults. We're all consenting adults. You're on this program. If someone said, you know, some rude words and that kind of stuff, I mean, would it be the end of the world? Political correctness has just gone too far, and strong, wonderful characters like House, etc. Why should he be restricted from sort of saying things a bit strongly?
Likes, I think is what you're telling us.
Michael.
No, I don't say that. But you know, you can take it too far. But you know, he and a lot of his blokes are impatient. They want the issues to be discussed. They're desperate that manufacturing industry be preserved, and they feel. And I can tell you this. I know this from speaking to lots of Liberals, that if the Liberals are in, people in manufacturing industry are going to face all kinds of consequences. I would expect, you know, from my experiences of Malcolm Turnbull and a lot of the Sydney Liberals like Joe Hockey, that the car industry will have all of its support withdrawn over time. That, of course, affects people in Victoria and South Australia. They're quite happy for Australians to drive around in $8,000 junky Chinese imports. But I think skills and all of the engineering that we have here in Australia should be kept.
Well, Paul Howe's used that language. I mean, we've had the similar language used just today, in fact, on Twitter to describe Tim Wilson in the same way. I believe he's got another question for you.
Yeah, Michael, firstly, I presume the manufacturing sector, though, will also benefit from a change of government through the removal of the carbon tax. But you did outline your religious beliefs, and I actually want your opinion on the story in the front page of the Australian today about the proposed changes to the anti-discrimination laws going before the Parliament. Do you support the Parliamentary Committee's recommendation to basically make it much harder for religious institutions to discriminate, which of course will also include Jewish schools?
I don't think religious institutions should discriminate against people, but we have to be very careful about this. You don't want people deliberately going into religious institutions and using new legislation of the government to initiate a whole series of court fights to make wider political points. If people have disagreements with religious institutions, they should criticise them. No one should be discriminated against. But
Mr. Danby,
I don't think we should
butt in and ask a question about this, because for me, I editorialised on this off the top of the program, saying that I hoped that the government didn't follow these recommendations. My reason being that if you did follow them, isn't one of the things that you would be removing is the right of a Jewish or a Catholic school or hospital to discriminate on the grounds of religion, i.e. it only wants Jewish, Catholic or whatever students or patients. That's a right you have to maintain, surely.
Well, if the focus of a Catholic school or a Jewish school is to sort of pass on the values of that faith group, then I think that's an entirely legitimate aspiration in Australian society. I don't think that people should be discriminated against if they're a teacher who's gay, who's been accepted to work in that organisation. But they're two entirely separate things. There's no evidence that the system we've got at the moment doesn't work. I think you have to be very careful with these kinds of changes, but at the same time, I'm absolutely against discrimination.
Michael, just on the topic of your religious views, you've been, it's fair to say, I think, one of the more passionate pro-Israel members of Parliament in Australia in recent memory. Mm-hmm. How outraged or shocked have you been by the story emerging out of Israel about the treatment of the Australian citizen there who died in that Israeli jail cell?
Ben Ziggy comes from a very respected family in the Melbourne Jewish community. It's a tragedy what happened to him. I'm very grateful that the Israeli court system operates despite the disgraceful attack on it by that Israel basher, Christine Milne, who had no evidence for what she said last week on AM. They are going to have an investigation into the negligence of prison officials, that someone who was on suicide watch wasn't properly supervised. But can we be such great critics in Australia? Because after all, that's happened when we've asked Queensland and New South Wales Police to keep a special eye on Aboriginal people too. So it's, you know, let's not cast the first stone on that alone. But here in Australia, I'm pleased to hear that both the Israeli government and the Australian government say that there was no conflict between our security agencies over Mr Zigia.
Are you concerned that there's been a cover-up?
No, in fact, it's now emerging quite clearly to me that there hasn't been a cover-up, that there was due process with him having very famous civil rights lawyer Avigdor Lieberman and Avigdor Feldman, sorry, Avigdor Lieberman's of course the foreign minister, three lawyers and the chief magistrate of Rishon LeZion, which is a very important town around where that prison is, did a year-long investigation and has represented the interests of the family. There's two issues. There was the issue of negligence in the Israeli prison system, and then there's the issue of the revelation of his identity and the factors that led to him being jailed. It's I really wonder why and who was behind fingering his identity. That has had obvious consequences for him, and I wonder why no one has focused on that as much as I think they should. I mean, it's extraordinary to me, Peter, that this has got as much coverage as it has by our Middle East correspondents, but the fact that a person with an Australian passport killed 5 tourists in Bulgaria, and that there are people from this Hezbollah organisation active in Sydney and going backwards and forwards to Syria, that has got much less publicity than it deserves, and it's an active danger to people in Sydney. It's the old Jewish joke of Jackie Mason, you know, look, there are 3 Jewish accountants on the corner, quick, we better cross the road, we're scared of them. I mean, the Zigia case is of no threat to Australians. These people who are with Hezbollah and coming backwards and forwards to Sydney are of threat to Australia. God forbid that they should put into practice some of the evil things that they've learnt over there. We don't want any successful attack on mainland Australia, and we have to say, whatever we think of the Australian security agencies, that they have prevented there being a single successful attack. 7 groups of people arrested, 35 under our laws, charged, convicted under Australian law. It's a great credit to this society that we've managed to handle it so equitably but preserve the safety of Australians. All
right, Michael Danby, we appreciate you joining us on this edition of Contrarians. Are you happy to stay with us? We're going to go take a commercial break.
No problems.
That's great, because we wanted to come back and go through one by one all the Rudd supporters, if that's all right. No, just kidding.
With everyone.
We are going to take a commercial break. We're going to keep the panel here as well. We've got sport and business